Hello, and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. I am Erik, and today we'll be taking a look at the MSI B450 Tomahawk Max. First, I'm going to give a quick overview of the board, then I'm going to be going over the testing of the motherboard, and going over the results of that testing. The B450 Tomahawk Max is an ATX motherboard on the AM4 platform. That out of the box, it supports 1st gen, 2nd gen, and 3rd gen Ryzen CPUs. The VRM is a 4+2 power phase. The VRM heatsink weighs 120 grams, with the SoC heatsink weighing 66 grams. There are 4 DIMM sockets with support for up to 64 gigs of system memory. The motherboard has 6 fan headers. 4 are labeled as system fan headers, 1 is labeled as a pump header, and 1 is labeled as the CPU fan header. There are no 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB headers, but there are 2 4-pin 12-volt RGB headers. MSI has provided the Easy Debug for fast boot error diagnosis. The rear I/O consists of 1 PS2 port. There are 2 USB 2.0 ports and 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports. There are also 2 USB 3.1 Gen 2 ports, one of which is a Type A and one which is a Type C. There is onboard Realtek gigabit LAN and onboard high definition Realtek audio. There is also an HDMI and a DVI port if you're looking to go with an APU. And finally, there is a flash BIOS button. This lets you update the BIOS without having a CPU plugged in. Now looking at the PCIe connections, there is one PCIe 3x16 slot. There is one PCIe 2x16 slot. There are 3 PCIe 2x1 slots. And for storage, there is one M.2 connector and 6 SATA 6 gigabit connectors. The B450 Tomahawk Max retails for around $115 US. Now for the testing, I tested the Ryzen 5 2600 and the Ryzen 5 3600. Now I started by finding a stable all-core CPU overclock. Once I found a stable CPU overclock, I started overclocking the RAM by using the XMP profiles. I did this with 3 different kits of RAM. I used 2 sticks of Corsair Vengeance LPX 3600 with the timings of 18, 22, 22, 42. I used 2 sticks of G.Skill Aegis 3000 with the timings of 16, 18, 18, 38. And I did 4 sticks of G.Skill Aegis 3000 with the timings of 16, 18, 18, 38. If the rated speed proved to be unstable, I reduced the memory frequency while keeping the timings the same. Then I took temperature readings of the CPU using Hardware Monitor, and I used my digital thermometer to take readings of the room temperature and of the VRMs. For the VRMs, I took readings from the top of the MOSFETs and the top of the chokes. The rest of the hardware I used for the testing, I used the Fractal Design Celsius S24 running at full speed as the CPU cooler. For the GPU, I used the Zotac GTX 1070 Mini. For the power supply, I used the EVGA 650GQ. For the OS drive, I used a 250 gig Western Digital Blue SATA 3 M.2 SSD. And all these tests were performed on an open-air test bench. Now before moving on, if you like what I'm doing here, please like the video and subscribe. It helps a lot. For all the testing, I used the most recent version of the BIOS, which at time of filming is 350. I also wanted to mention that MSI did a pretty nice job with the UEFI and the BIOS on this board. Everything was laid out really well and it was easy to use and it worked. Okay, so starting off with the 2600, it took a voltage of 1.35 volts to maintain an all-core overclock of 4.1 GHz. The Corsair Vengeance 3600 kit was able to run at 3533, and 2 DIMMs of the G.Skill 3000 ran at its rated speed of 3000, and 4 DIMMs of G.Skill 3000 was able to run at 2733. During the stress testing, the CPU had a peak temperature of 48.5 degrees, and that is shown as a delta T. The MOSFETs were quite cool at 29.7 degrees Celsius, again shown as a delta, and the chokes were at 31.6 degrees Celsius. So the temperatures of this board are quite good. Now for the Ryzen 5 3600, it took a voltage of 1.26875 volts to maintain an all-core overclock of 4.2 gigahertz, which puts it right in line with all the other boards. So for the memory testing, all three kits were able to run at their rated speeds. For the stress testing, the CPU had a peak temperature of 56.5 degrees Celsius. Again, this is shown as a delta, which actually makes it the coolest motherboard of anything that's been tested thus far, which I wouldn't put too much into that. It is still within the margin of error. During the stress test, the MOSFETs had a temperature of 11.7 degrees above ambient, and the chokes had a temperature of 21 degrees. And again, this is shown as a delta. So the chokes do run a little bit warmer than the other boards tested, but they're still well within the manufacturer's specs. And that's all I got for this video, all the normal stuff. If you liked the video, you know what to do. Click the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.